We're now moving to the first knowledge session dealing with taking innovation mainstream. That's the title of the session, as you have seen from the program. Reaching the poorest and most vulnerable. This discussion, the discussants will basically, it all started from a paper that is looking at how JSDF has partnered with IDA to provide grants aimed at assisting the poorest and most vulnerable groups. I want to therefore, I wanted to welcome Joachim van Amsberg, Vice President and Head of Network for Country Services, who's chairing this session, and all the other guests that I'm going to name. We have Maisha Strozier, Country Representative for Africare, based in Nigeria. Welcome. We have Mina Munshi, Senior Economist in the Africa region. Welcome. We have Antonella Bassani, Director, Resource Mobilization for IDA. We have here on my left, Arun Das and Andy Desaraj, who are from the Asian Heritage Foundation, the GEO project from India. We also have Anush Benazian, who's the lead social protection specialist in the Africa region, and Valerio Rotaro from the Millennium Challenge Corporation in Moldova. Welcome. Joachim, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thanks for the introduction and mentioning this panel. It's really a delight to be here to convene the first panel of the title, Taking Innovation Mainstream, Reaching the Poorest and Most Vulnerable. I'm Joachim von Emsberg, World Bank Vice President for Operations Policy. I'm delighted to be here for two principal reasons. One is the title of the session is kind of like the holy grail of development. Innovation, taking innovation mainstream, isn't that what we're trying to do all the time? Innovate and at the same time scale up mainstream while reaching the poorest and most vulnerable. I think you've sort of put the whole essence of our development struggle into this title, so that's challenging. I hope we can really have an interesting conversation around that. Secondly, I'm excited because I know JSDF from my own days as country director in Philippines and Indonesia. And it's really nice to see the Indonesia PECA project, Ibu Nani and her colleagues presented here. I think one project that really shows how, with the help of JSDF, community groups have been able to achieve something that is captured in the title here, reaching the poorest, innovating in new approaches, and at the same time influencing a much larger program. So I think wonderful experience. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I just want to ask the panel members to introduce themselves with just a few words, who you are and what links you with JSDF. We get into the essence of your projects later on, but if you just tell us who you are and what you have to deal with at JSDF. Maybe Mina, if you start.
Okay. I'm Mina Munshi, Senior Economist. I'm right now in Africa region. I recently moved to Africa. I was in South Asia for 15 years. Focused mostly on rural development, empowering the poor and empowering the community organizations. And that has been my work last 10 years. It started with JSDF grants. The initial grant was in Sri Lanka in 2000, where we just took 6 villages to start with and tested an innovative model of village development, holistic direct funding village development model. The similar kind of principles then were used in JSDF in Tamil Nadu, in India, Tamil Nadu, again with only 10 villages, where focus was on governance aspects, inclusion aspects, and decentralization, local governments. They have the village level governments. In both cases, these JSDFs gave us an opportunity and flexibility to innovate. And in both cases, these models have been scaled up through the bank as well as through the governments, respective governments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mina. Valerio?
I'm Valerio Rotaro, and I'm former Director of Community and Social Development Department of Moldova Social Investment Fund. Actually, my experience with JSDF funding started in 2003, when I acted as a procurement specialist and later on as Director of Community and Social Development Department. In my two capacities, I worked on the 3 JSDF supported grants. 2 of them were for a region, for a post-conflict region in Moldova called Transnistria. And one of them was dedicated to piloting CDD implementation procedures for infrastructure projects and development of alternative, innovative social care services at community level. For these grants, I was involved in developing the project proposals, but also in defining, together with Anush Bejanyan, the operational procedures that communities were supposed to use. Also, as I worked as a procurement specialist, I was involved in training communities in conducting procurement in a more decentralized project management framework. Social monitoring of implemented projects was also part of my department's responsibilities. And also want to add here, and that I'm very proud to be here among the panel members and represent my project and my country.
Thank you very much, Valerio. I think we have a lot of experience on the JSDF here around the panel. Maisha.
Yes. My name is Maisha Strozier. I am the country director for AfriCare's program in Nigeria, West Africa. I've been in development for about 20 years now, starting as a Peace Corps volunteer, largely in West Africa, and largely focused on gender, integration of gender, mainly vulnerable women, vulnerable populations of women, into larger agriculture, health, and other projects. I also work on democracy and governance projects around civil society advocacy and oversight of government around social services. I started with AfriCare in 2008. At that time, AfriCare had already started to implement the project that many of you saw on the display over there, the Women's Initiative for Sex Education and Economic Empowerment, a very innovative program, not in the sense that all of the programming was new, the ideas were there, but to bring together the kind of programming that addresses the many different factors that make women, particularly young women, vulnerable to HIV and AIDS. And ironically, I worked on the World Bank MAP review, or Multi-Country Assistance Program review, for the HIV/AIDS program in Nigeria in 2006 as a gender advisor. So saw a lot of the issues that led to the World Bank approving the WISE project for funding. So thank you, JSDF.
Thank you, Maisha. Antonella.
Thank you. My name is Antonella Bassani. I'm the director of the IDA Resource Mobilization Department in the World Bank. This department deals with the mobilization and allocation of IDA resources for IDA countries. And it has just completed the replenishment of the next 3 years for IDA. Prior to joining this department, about 1 year ago, I worked in several regions of the World Bank in operations, and as such, I had the opportunity to work with some teams who worked on JSDF projects.
My name is Anush Bejanyan. I am a lead social protection specialist in Africa region currently. I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to moving to Africa region, I was for 12 years working in ECA region, and you probably see the Moldova project where I worked with Valerio Rotaru on 3 different JSDF proposals, and we believe all 3 went very well, and one of them is actually on the display here. In addition to Moldova, I currently work on a JSDF project in Tanzania, which is piloting conditional cash transfers at the community level, community managed conditional cash transfers, and we got recently approved a very interesting, in my view, a very innovative project for Yemen, which is dealing with managing community cultural heritage assets for community benefits, benefiting Yemen, and Yemen is very rich of cultural assets that communities had taken very little advantage of so far. So I hope next time around we will be celebrating also that very interesting Yemen project. As for how I came to work with JSDF, actually, it was very interesting too, because when the JSDF was discussed as a concept in 1999-2000, I was among the task managers, the task force for establishment of JSDF. JSDF was consulting in order to understand what should be the main principle. So since I was consulted then, I happened to take full advantage of that facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun.
I'm Arun Das from the Asian Heritage Foundation, my colleague who you will meet shortly. We are both from the Asian Heritage Foundation, which is a grant recipient of the JSDF, and we have been able to act on our convictions to lead a design-led livelihoods generations program in the cultural industry sector. The key outcome of this ongoing process has been the configuration of a community-owned cultural industries brand. Geo, we've displayed some of our stuff behind. We'd be happy if you came visited us. This community-owned brand comes with the message, believe, buy, belong, map your world from where you are. We've held this belief for a long time that the huge unemployment crisis in India, despite the very encouraging growth rate, the economic growth rate that the country has experienced over the last couple of decades, arises from the fact that we haven't quite appreciated the legacy of traditional skills, practices, the traditional knowledge base that actually India possesses. And in an environment of content-led economies in the world today, India could actually leverage that as a key position of vantage. And that's where our effort comes in, with an innovation focus, which tries to make relevant to the contemporary market scenario these skills which, despite these skilled communities having this inheritance, generations-old inheritance of knowledge, they are rendered poor, vulnerable, simply because they are no more relevant to the contemporary markets. And that's the cycle where that the Asian Heritage Foundation is trying to break. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Anandi Dasraj. I also represent Asian Heritage Foundation. And basically, in India, we're working in 2 states, Bihar and Andhra Pradesh, in 13 different craft clusters. And I think we will discuss more about the project once the discussion is on. Thank you.
It's a wonderful panel. Thanks so much for joining us. I think a very rich set of experiences from primarily 3 countries where JSDF has been supporting projects. Big panel, so we all have to be disciplined with time. To get us kick-started, I think the organizers have pulled together a little video that summarizes some of the work that was done to analyze these projects. So let me suggest we turn on the video and watch that for a few minutes before we talk about the experience in these 3 countries.
Well, I mean, the most important thing to appreciate is that IDA countries are difficult to work in. They have very few resources. They can ill afford to waste them. And as a result, it is a tremendous opportunity for them to be able to obtain grant money that they can use to experiment with ideas that are new, or that test out different approaches than they've used before. JSDF, since its inception, has done 220 grants. Of those 220, 69 have been in IDA countries, and 37 IDA countries in all. And one of the biggest differences between JSDF operations in IDA countries and those in IBRD countries is that we require that there be a tie-in between a JSDF project and an IDA project. And in large part, that was done in order to ensure that we have task teams that are mature, that have experience in the country, that have real views about the sector, who in turn are making some of the decisions regarding how how to support project components with JSDF grants, and how to use the JSDF grants once they get it in order to further the aims of a coherent and unified project. Now, what we did as part of the study was to take a very close look through two thematic sets of studies, one on gender development and the other one on child development and early child education, at the principal objective that JSDF has had with regard to its grants as reflected through annual reports since its inception. And that principal objective is to scale up, replicate, or otherwise complement IDA operations. Out of those, what we found was that there was extensive complementarity, but not complementarity on each and every single project. The biggest determinants of the level of complementarity, the level of scaling up in these two thematic studies, was the extent of ownership that we found in the host country. Ownership at the local level, and as importantly, ownership at the central government level. Where there was ownership, the results were looked at very closely, and when the results proved to be beneficial, there was a national program put in place to scale up the findings. That was particularly true in the gender development area in Indonesia and Pakistan, and with regard to the early childhood education, that was especially true in Cambodia and in Mali and Niger. But we were also testing to see how stated JSDF objectives of filling gaps, testing innovation, community participation, and reaching the poorest and most vulnerable in the community would work. When it came to filling gaps, there are two projects that really succeeded in a very major way. The first one, curiously enough, was India, Tamil Nadu, and it was the Panchayat or Local Government Development Program. In that program, what the government of Tamil Nadu felt was that they were not doing an effective job of reaching the targeted populations, even though they had some pretty well thought out programs. And they determined that they needed to upgrade the capacity of local governments and community-based organizations in order to manage these programs. What happened in the end was that this program didn't just affect one project or one particular sector. It affected an entire group of projects, making them more effective, not just for IDA, but for other donors. The other project where there was an important gap was in Vietnam, the Early Childhood Development Program. And the issue there was that everyone was for early childhood education. The central ministry, the local governments, the issue was they needed some experience in how to work through curricula and how to develop it. But there was one group of vulnerable people that wasn't even touched by early childhood education and therefore had weak education scores going forward. And those were ethnic minorities with strong linguistic and cultural attachments. And the JSDF project sought to develop early childhood education projects with ethnic minorities as the targeted group. When it came to innovation, the project or a group of projects that really jumped out at me were the Central American hurricane relief projects. There was one in Nicaragua and the other one in Honduras. There was extensive loss of life and damage to property as a result of Hurricane Mitch. And these projects were done in the aftermath of Hurricane Mitch, and what the task team decided to do was to test a completely new approach, or new for them approach, to addressing damage from hurricane. In effect, their objective was to mitigate the risk from a hurricane, not try to prevent it, and not try to prevent the resultant flooding. They did also experiment with a different type of civil works. Instead of retaining walls to keep floodwaters out, what they did was to build drainage ditches in order to remove floodwaters as they came in. Both of these projects were extremely successful. They were scaled up in Nicaragua and Honduras, and more importantly, they were replicated in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, even though those countries didn't benefit from either a JSDF or a World Bank project. The second place was Moldova. And in Moldova, the nature of social interventions followed the old Soviet-style residential system. Now, there was a problem with this because the poor in Moldova are concentrated in rural areas, areas that have small localities where it's very difficult to build a large-scale institution, and the large-scale institutions were in the cities. So, in effect, what happened was that in order to provide food for people growing old or for orphans, they were extracted from their communities, taken into these large institutions, and goodness knows what would happen. The Moldova project experimented with community-driven development in order to establish which were the most important social interventions, and then with non-residential programs in 7 of the district capitals. Again, these were extremely successful, and what wound up happening there was that the Moldovan government, a year into the program, began looking for funds to scale up. Not only did they scale up using the subsequent IDA project, but they also got funding from the European Union for additional scale-up so that they could really develop a program on a national basis for non-residential social interventions. Community-driven development is a very major objective of JSDF. And every single one of the projects looked at in the case study involved some form of community-driven development. But the most important one probably was the Casamance project in Senegal, where community-driven development approaches that had been successful in other countries and in Senegal, in other situations, were applied for the first time to a post-conflict situation. What they found was that the forced collaboration that the approaches to these projects required helped the peace process. It brought people who had previously been antagonistic to one another together so that they, in turn, developed the sub-projects that were implemented. And this JSDF project, in turn, informed a redesign of the parent project that had been used to get there. Every single one of these programs targeted the weakest and most vulnerable. In Central America, it was slum dwellers. In Moldova, it was the rural poor. In Vietnam, it was ethnic minorities. In Senegal, it was people who returned to conflict areas who had been aggrieved by these conflicts. And finally, in India, it was the whole gamut of rural poor. The conclusion we come to is that JSDF has been very successful in IDA countries, especially where there was an IDA task team that had a unified vision of where they wanted to take the sector, and they had an approach to use the JSDF funding in the manner in which it was intended in order to strengthen their integrated programs.
Okay, that was a very nice overview of JSDF experience across the IDA countries. We have now 1 hour to drill deeper and really go into the 3 project experiences of which we have leaders represented on this panel, drill into the question of how do these 3 projects really work, how do they reach the poorest, and then ultimately the question of how do these projects succeed or don't succeed in scaling up, achieving bigger impact at a larger scale. What are the lessons for what to do and what not to do? Since we have an hour, we have a large panel, and I hope that you from the audience will participate in this conversation with questions and your own thoughts. We all have to discipline ourselves a little bit in terms of making our very concise interventions. I do want to start with Nigeria and Maisha and ask you to share with us how the WISE project in Nigeria is working, what's special about it, and how does it fit the JSDF criteria that we just heard about, filling gaps, testing innovation, reaching out to groups that hadn't been previously reached, or a combination of those.
Yes, we like to think of the WISE project now as a model, in the sense that the project implementation period was from 2004, and we rounded up in 2010. We have a few more dissemination kinds of activities to share the model at a national level, but right now we're modeling, or we're continuing to refine the model and using it in other projects and in our discussions with state governments, local governments about how they can address the vulnerability of young women in Nigeria to HIV and AIDS and early age of marriage and other conditions related to health. The WISE project was an effort that involved a lot of different, very committed people at different levels of Nigerian society and the international community. As most of you know, I think with women and children, the major focus of the JSDF, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of a commitment that drives the projects and drives the innovations. The former country director for Nigeria, through, I think, force of personality and commitment, was able to bring together the government of Nigeria through the agency that focuses on HIV and AIDS, the World Bank, a very committed staff in Nigeria. I think most of you know that Nigeria is a very big country in a lot of ways, not just in terms of population, but in terms of the focus of the international community on development in general and the country's growing problems with HIV and AIDS, a growing population affected by the disease. We were able to, using the WISE concept, or developing the WISE concept, and I think it evolved over an extended period of time from a project that was very clear in the early stages that there is a group of young women out there who are particularly vulnerable because of their social and economic positions in society and are engaging in high-risk behaviors, and that those needs were not being directly addressed by the national level interventions. And there was a lot to be learned by going out into the communities and understanding those issues and developing a concept that really focused on community-level resources, community-level interventions that could support the women through knowledge, through increased awareness, through peer counseling, through social support, through economic empowerment to change their lives. Over the life of the project, I think you've seen from the boards there that over 6,000 women have increased knowledge and awareness of their health and access to clinical services, and another 3,000 were engaged in economic development, skills development for improving their lives economically, and another 1,600 were supported with some startup support for their businesses. And the thing about the project, and I'm accustomed to working with larger projects, and I think we're in the World Bank here, and I think a lot of people associated with the projects are more accustomed to working with larger projects. But I think the thing that I've learned, and a lot of people have learned through our discussions and disseminations, is that a lot can be done with limited resources. And as a matter of fact, I've said on many occasions that If we had more money, I don't think we would have been as innovative as we were. And I really think the fund should sort of pat itself on the back a bit by being a leader in that sense. I think a lot of the other donors are picking up on this, in that we can't just implement, we have to learn. We have to step back and take the time to ask some questions and develop our projects in a way that asks questions, answers questions, and then inform not only our work, but the work at government level. And in terms of the scale up of the WISE project, as a result of the learnings from the WISE project, Africare is now involved in a much larger scale project around orphans and vulnerable children in communities with high level of HIV/AIDS. And Africare is focused on the gender component using the WISE model, a low cost, very cost effective model. The WISE project was funded for $1.5 million for 4 years, with another $400,000 through the World Bank supported IDA project.
Actually, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to get back a little later to the scaling up, because I think what you're telling us is really interesting. Before that, I want to push you a little harder on how do you reach the poorest? I mean, concretely, what did WISE do to get to the young women? Presumably HIV/AIDS involves some stigma in many countries. How do you get to the groups that the government programs don't reach? Can you tell us a little more how it works on the ground? Maybe some example?
Yes, fortunately for us, I think it was a factor of the design as well, is that the communities that we decided to work in were in close proximity to where Africare is based, which gave us a lot more time to get out into the communities and identify the key members of the community who could help us to identify those who were most in need, and to work with Africare, not just in giving us ideas through focus groups, but through being fully integrated in the project design and in the implementation. The beneficiaries were, as you can imagine, commercial women who are engaged in sexual activity for money, for cash, aren't the most open, and they're not as easy to find and to work with. So you really needed the confidence of the women, and to gain that confidence, you had to bring in people who they could trust and who understood their needs. So in that sense, through our baseline assessments and early work, we're able to go out with leaders in the communities, people who were working with these vulnerable populations of women, people who could go into some of the brothels and are into the communities with high prevalence rates, and talk with the women about the issues that they were facing and how we could design a project that could best support their needs. As noted in some of the documentation, at each level of the project, the implementation team used members of the community to train, to serve as peer educators, to not just train around reproductive health and serve as peer educators, but also in training the women in the vocational skills that they acquired. These were members of the community who were there before we got there and will be there afterwards. They're continuing to support the women. The women who, largely women, almost all women, who supported the reproductive health training. These are women, nurses, public health workers who are in the communities and are available, accessible to the women there. The state governments, we worked in 2 states in the Federal Capital Territory, were very much involved in the process because we wanted them to continue to support the activities after the project closed, but also to help develop the model that would work best for them once the project closed. Because that's what this is all about. And we did it with $1.9 million spread across a large population in 3 states, which means that it's not as much of a challenge in terms of finding the resources to implement a project with this kind of impact. And that's what the governments liked and the communities liked. They could take this model, not have to spend millions and millions of dollars to do it, and they could see how it would work for them once the project moved on.
Thanks, Maisha. I think it's fascinating to hear you, and I think you're directing our attention to this whole concept of community and what's the role of pre-existing community, how is it reinforced or not by a new project. I'm sure we'll get back to that topic and then we'll get back to the upscaling issue, so thanks. Let's move for a while from Nigeria to India. And Arun, maybe you can tell us the story of the GEO project. Am I pronouncing this correctly? GEO, sorry. The GEO project. Tell us the story of it. Tell us how the partnership with JSDF evolved and how the project meets the JSDF criteria.
Well, the foundation that Anandi and I come from has had a long-standing interest and investment in the sector of people who are skilled, who can work with their hands, who have talent, but are poor and vulnerable. So you're talking about not just weavers or craftsmen, you're talking about singers and acrobats and street performers and so on and so forth. And a series of legislation in the modern liberalized India has increasingly pushed these people to the fringes of what we call and know of as development. We are an independent foundation and we are not funded by anyone or by the government. We're not supported by the government, but in our individual capacity, we have over the years, over the last couple of decades, done this work with, you just heard about the Nigerian experience. You have to constantly interrogate yourself and interrogate your own convictions in the area to find ways forward. And it's not like there is a rule book which actually tells you how, where you might find these answers. In this journey, the Asian Heritage Foundation came up with a 1,500-page report as recommendations to the government of the potentiality of cultural industries. Entirely self-funded project, was submitted to various echelons of planning in the government and has since accumulated a fair amount of dust, I'm sure. In the meanwhile, the JSDF actually came in with a very generous offer to enable us to actually act on our convictions. The outcome of which was this process. The key focus of this of the GEO process has been innovation. Like I mentioned briefly earlier, you're talking about a country full of traditional knowledge, pockets of traditional knowledge seated in the cultural diversity of the country. So you're not just talking about a body of knowledge which is Indian within quotes, but within the subcontinent there are communities who have for generations perpetuated very keen skill sets which cannot be learned over a period of a course in an architecture school or a design school. There are modes of transmission which are intangible, which are intuitive, and so on and so forth. And yet these communities, because they haven't kind of caught up with the market and the economic forces that are at play, have gotten marginalized and are impoverished. So our focus has been in those communities, and the GEO intervention actually works with their skills to see what we might be able to develop such that their effort becomes useful for a contemporary market. And thereby, that then becomes the key. The innovation aspect actually becomes the key to sustaining their livelihoods in the long run. The one more value added that actually the process has generated over its the process is going to the grant cycle, or the project, technically speaking, will come to a close by the middle of this year. What has come up already is a community-owned company, a profit-making company where the majority stakes are held by cluster organizations in the two sample states, the three sample states that we have been working in. This, I believe, and we all have believed in to be a major outcome of the process. It's difficult, it's uncertain, uncharted route of cluster organizations at the village level across a country as diverse as India to own a profit-making, income-generating engine and actually run it successfully over a period of time. But this is the aspiration that we are treading on, and it is hugely fueling for the bunch of us who are associated with it.
Can you say a little bit more about the strategy of making these initiatives commercially viable? Are you trying to link them to product markets, to credit markets? How can you make these initiatives in the end viable enterprises without losing your objective of cultural diversity?
Absolutely. I don't think in fact, cultural diversity, there's so much of it, in India that I don't think diversity per se is threatened. If diversity is threatened, it's by the market. It's not by processes like this, which are trying to help create value out of what people do with their hands, of how indigenous talent gets expressed. But I think I'll request Anandi to explain to you a kind of value chain that we work on, wherein we try and create a loop which recognizes, revitalizes, on occasion, revives a body of knowledge at the local level, and then innovates with it such that it can generate an income, so that that body of knowledge then can get transmitted and it is perpetuated.
Yeah. To start with, we piloted this project in 2 states, Bihar and Andhra. And the way we went about the project is we actively collaborated with the state government to identify and help us in institution building. So our group of artisans could range from 15 to 60 artisans. We got them together. Our designers go to the field and work with them in creating a different range of products that cater to the market. And once this institution is built, we are also trying to link them with the government to help them with microfinance for the working capital requirements, and also for setting up a community-based center where they can all come and work together. So that's where at the back end we are ensuring that our products are made as per the market demands. And as in terms of connecting them to markets, we have identified different marketing channels. One could be institutional orders, because a lot of our products can get into bigger institutions. So we've tied up with a chain of hotels called Taj in India, wherein we're trying to supply these products to them. Also, we've identified certain boutique stores where we're trying to market the products. So market linkages are established this way. And also we're doing participation in events where we're getting a lot of orders for them.
What's been your biggest success story so far? Can you give us an example of something that's really taken off that you've supported?
Yeah, okay. We did have a slide on this image actually, which I wanted to show you all, but I think it's among a bunch of slides, so I think I'll avoid the slide, but I'll just quickly explain to you. I think we might have one product of this particular natural fiber cluster we are working in the state of Bihar, where this grass grows wildly everywhere. In the recent years, even that has stopped growing because a lot of this land has been claimed for industrial development, etc. But it's a golden grass, a sikki. They call it sikki in the local language, but it grows in other parts as well, different species of it. And traditionally, the community used to make auspicious things with this grass. So they would make trousseau boxes. Subsequently, when even that went out of fashion because there were other plastic alternatives, they started making bread boxes and things like that to sell in the rural markets. Okay, so you could say that the average price of that product would be less than $1. Since we started working there, we've innovated with the strength of the grass itself, so we could actually use it to make innovative furniture, because the skill lies in the weaving. They have incredible weaving skill. One blade of grass is split, and the finer you split it, the finer is the texture of the weave. We worked with several reinforcements. We came up with a range of furniture. The one thing of which there is a photograph in one of our panels there is a space divider with sikki grass woven objects, and it was a revelation to the team working in the village as much as it was to us how the value of this one product is about $2,000, and the sheer jump of that was something astounding for everybody involved, including the designers. We have a team of designers at the foundation which is very committed, and they love their presence in the village, learning from these guys who have impeccable skill in what they do. And it's just this much interface of being able to turn the same skill that they have to something that is valued much more and is wanted much more. And they have begun to see their own work in a totally new context. The fact that they can actually command a presence in a retail show means a lot to them now. One more thing which I just want to quickly add to what Anandi said is that the key point here is that all our cluster organizations know that they are majority owners of this company through which their produce sells. That's a huge empowerment point, because they are not mere suppliers of labor or even skilled labor to the value chain. They are stakeholders. This sense of personal stakeholding is something that has so hugely transformed their sense of self that it has fed back into our commitment to the process, to think anew constantly and reinvent the wheel.
One more question, I'm just fascinated. Where's the market? Can we all now rush to our computers and order on the internet some of the products, or we're not there yet?
Yeah, we've launched the brand. We placed it in the public domain as of 31st of March 2010. The foundation has been a not-for-profit foundation, and this is the first time that it is venturing into trading. And we are excited because we are not trading, we are not the owners of the company, etc., and we are trading based on certain values that we hold dear to our hearts. And hence the process has been watchful and slow, as I think we need to be, because you mentioned scalability, and I'm sure we'll talk about scalability, and we'll have a few nuggets to add in there. In this sort of a development, you're talking about reviving the blue whale, for instance, or preserving the Asian tiger. You're talking about reviving an entire way of life, a knowledge system, and creating something of it which has a market value. And hence, we've been watchful within I think by the end of our pilot phase, we'd have touched about 0.35 million in our sales. And the channels that we have been exploring, like Anandi has said, we've led the brand with high-end craftsmanship. So you are able to demonstrate what working with the hands or expressing indigenous talent can mean. So you lead with quality, and then we have two other brands. The Geo brand is sort of this very high-end stuff, some of the outcomes you will see here. Then we have a medium density market brand, which is Jani, and we have a rural brand for rural markets called Jiva. So that we are able to, and this is our approach to scalability. I won't take up too much time on scalability yet, but it's so that larger and larger numbers of artisans can be included into the process who have the skill but need some more development time so that the skill can be honed and there's upgradation, and then then you will really see what people can, why is it worth living by your hands? And in India particularly, it is an imperative. Larger and larger number of people are going to have to live by their hands. A recent ILO report says that by the end of 2020, India will have the largest number of people, the biggest working labor force, for which we'll have to provide the largest number of jobs in the country. And I'm sure I've digressed from your question, sorry.
No, there will be more questions, but I just, in between, ask Meena, since you've worked for the bank in India, how does it look to you? How does this fit into what the bank is doing in India? How do you see it?
Thanks. I'll go to Tamil Nadu, because with Tamil Nadu we have a similar kind of program, and it started with the JSDF grant in 2004. Focus was again to filling these gaps. How do you reach the most vulnerable, most disadvantaged people in India? And in Tamil Nadu, being a progressive state, they had various government programs and various poverty reduction programs, but every time they were missing out these 30-40% of most vulnerable poor in the villages. So we started with a test. So, well, again, we had learned from JSDF pilot in Sri Lanka of giving the communities the ultimate power of decision making. How can they control and decide who they should reach and how they should reach? So this was one of the strategies that was being tested. How do you ensure inclusion within the communities, but make them the owners of that, rather than outsiders coming in and telling them the poor are, in these neighborhoods. Let people identify who are the poor people and who are the most vulnerable. Let them define what that vulnerability means. It was facilitated by the bank team and as well as the government team. And they came up with a very innovative methodology, which is participatory identification of the poor. And focus was really on improving them, giving them self-esteem, confidence, as well as livelihood improvement. So they came up with this methodology, which government found very fascinating, and then later on it was scaled up not only in Tamil Nadu, but in other programs too, where the whole community gets involved into defining various shades of poverty and vulnerability. And for the first time in Tamil Nadu, and I would say this is a good example for India, on disability side as well, they came up with, because they found that there are a lot of disabled people in the villages, and they mainstreamed these vulnerable and disabled people, helped them organize into the community, in the groups, and focus was then in linking with organizations like what you are doing, really attracting market and creating employment for them. So this has become a strategy for most livelihood programs in India, and we are currently we are under preparation with National Livelihood Program, taking these kind of strategies and approaches and scaling them nationwide.
I think it's fascinating. We'll get back to that again because especially in such a continental-sized country like India, how can a small project make a difference? I think is one of the key challenges. Let me get back to that in a moment. And let me move for a while from this continental-sized country to a much smaller country, which is Moldova, and ask Anush maybe to set the stage for us a little bit of what kind of problem was the JSDF program trying to solve, and then turn to Valerio to describe the program for us.
Okay, thank you. This JSDF was linked to a project called Moldova Social Investment Fund, which started in 1999. And basically, it was the first project in Moldova, which is a post-Soviet country, which very much emphasized the community and citizen participation. That was a very important aspect of this first Moldova Social Investment Fund, because coming out of the Soviet legacy, participation was nowhere to be seen in the country. And not only in Moldova, in most of the post-Soviet countries. So then in the first project, we realized that citizens are really active when they empowered. So a lot of small community-based organizations emerged during the first project. But then what do you do with them? They emerge, there is no funding, there is no other ways of participation, etc. So that's where we thought that one of the ideas under JSDF would be, why don't we try to see how we can directly engage with the community organization without going through the local governments, or where citizens themselves can actually do something for their communities. So that was one aspect that we thought, okay, before we go to scale with the second project, which was starting preparation, we just take the advantage of the JSDF to pilot the community-driven development. The other aspect was about the most vulnerable in the community, and these are persons with disabilities, orphan children, and really elderly. And in Moldova, if you look at the population, you will see that there are a lot of single elderly people that are unable to take care of themselves. So again, as was explained, I think, in the video, one of the Soviet legacies was that all these people were put in these really ugly and really bad institutions, and there were a lot of horror stories about orphanage in Hinchesti, for example, which was one of the orphanages in the country, big orphanages in the country. So the government actually really wanted to do something about these institutions, especially about orphanages, where there a lot of abuse of children even was going on. But however, there was no model, or there was no any experience in these countries, as is was the story in many of the other Soviet countries, that about with this community-based care or home-based care, or because that was non-existent. So they didn't know how to do it in practice. And So we decided that we take JSDF and try to pilot these type of services at the community level, so that we create some experience and lessons and knowledge for the government to actually scale it up, but also develop policies for such type of care, because there are a lot of nuances involved on how do you contract, how do you actually implement this type of community-based social care services. So we had these two components to pilot, and the agreement we had with the government that they will take it to scale, but also to from the lessons derived from these pilots, they will develop national policies. I haven't worked in Moldova in the last 3 years, but I just caught up with Valerio, and he tells me that there is now a policy, at least for the care for orphans and for kids with disability and for the elderly, whereas if they don't actually go to the institution and the community creates some sort of community care for them, then there is a financing for these communities through the state budget. So that was a good thing, I think.
Thanks, Anush and Valeria. Maybe you can tell us more about how does the project work on the ground in Moldova? How do you deal with the tension that seems to be embedded there of, on the one hand, going directly to the communities because local governments can't provide the service, but on the other hand, wanting to build ownership and a role for the governments to actually take over and scale up? Valeria.
Indeed, this was a big challenge because MCF1 is an ordinary World Bank supported project, that used PIU to finance projects in communities. But as Anush rightfully mentioned, we felt that this was not enough because it was important not only to finance something in a community, but also provide for the sustainability of that project. And ensuring this sustainability could be achieved only by just making people become owners of the project. That's why we decided that it's time to sort of change things and try to pilot something new. That's why our project, the JSDF supported project, was focused on three components. Two of them have already been mentioned. One is CDD projects at community level, and they concerned renovation of social infrastructure facilities like schools, kindergartens, roads, water and gas pipelines, and they were based on the proposals submitted by communities. And we needed to do something more about it, and I'll come back to that. And the second component was dedicated to development of alternative social care services for the most needy. And we piloted some procedures that later on we expanded and improved, and I'll also talk about it a little bit later. The third component was more of a tool for communities to manage themselves, let's put it, meaning development of a participatory monitoring and evaluation system, which was an extremely useful tool both for MCF, for the government, but also for the communities themselves to manage their own problems in a community, but also provide sort of plan the funds that they had, the limited funds they had in order to solve the most important problems. So coming back to the three components, and starting the first one, I'd like to say that given the community-based organizations that we had already established within the CIF1 project, we thought that it's time to go to a further level and allow communities using the CDD approach to implement the projects. We announced the tender, and 7 communities won the project proposals, and the new features were added to the project. First of all, they had to develop community strategic development plans in order to invest rationally or use the foreign money rationally in the solution of their problems. Second, big component was dedicated to empowerment of communities through technical assistance, development of skills, training, and the most impressive to me result that we achieved was that they learned how to manage funds coming from outside, but also they acquired skills they have applied to their own funds as well. Because previously we would pay directly from the CIF bank account to the contractor's bank account. This time we decided to use a different approach and pay communities or the CBOs at the community level in tranches based on completion reports. Community mobilization and planning, as I mentioned already, was an important element because they needed to plan their own resources in order to solve the problems. Community accountability and transparency was extremely important in this process because given the fact that we would transfer money directly to the bank account of the CBO, we needed to be sure that the money will be spent according to the objectives of the proposal and not be wasted. That's why new procedures were introduced, like community reporting and periodical reports. But also at the end of the project, they would organize a community report meeting and will present the results of the project implementation. So this was briefly about the first component, community CDD project.
Just let me
infrastructure.
Ask you to bring this a bit to life for us. Can you just tell us the story of maybe the project, the sub-project that you found most challenging, most exciting, and what it has produced? Just give us a story of a sub-project that's really worked well in your mind.
I would say that practically all the projects were successful. Why? Because based on that, we expanded the coming funds to this approach, to the city approach. And although in the first project we had only 7 projects, in the second part of the financing we had already 121 projects using the CDD approach. And to me, the most important thing was that we didn't see, or no money was wasted. And that's extremely important because these are money coming from different taxpayers of different countries, and you need to make sure that the money will not be just wasted, but will be spent according to the objectives.
Are these mostly small infrastructure projects or livelihood projects? What's the concrete activity that the communities are undertaking?
These are, projects related to renovation of schools, partial renovation of schools, kindergartens, water supply pipelines, gas roads, bridges, but these are all community projects.
No, thanks so much.
And they don't cost too much. The cost of the project or the budget would be less than $75,000.
I think it's just a wonderful example how very little money can make a huge difference in terms of community building and accountability. So I think we've got a wonderfully rich set of experiences on the innovation side here, how small projects make a difference, how you've reached the poorest, these very different areas of these 3-4 projects that we've heard about here. I do want to direct us now for the remainder of our session, for which we don't have a lot of time, on the second part of the title of the session, which is mainstreaming and upscaling, and be a bit more explicit, probing ourselves, how do small projects make a big difference? How do what seems to me wonderful projects in terms of the direct results, how do they influence larger policies, larger programs? I do want to invite Antonella maybe to make a first comment on that, because Antonella and I and Axel and others were just in Brussels where we've raised $50 billion for the next 3 years of IDA. Antonella, how are these experiences going to influence how these $50 billion are going to be spent?
Clearly, the issue of scaling up successful interventions that have been experimented and have shown results and replicating them in other countries, in other contexts, is so critical for the ability of IDA resources to leverage impact. And the fact that IDA project and JSDF project are designed in a complementary way is so critical, and it makes the JSDF different from other interventions. Because of the complementarity, in the approach and in the design. It maximizes the opportunities that these interventions, if they are proved to be successful, can be then scaled up and replicated first with the leverage of the financial resources of IDA, and second with the ability of IDA team to influence the programs at the national level in terms of sector strategies, of country strategies. And there are many examples that are around the room and have been mentioned by panelists where successful JSDF programs have been then picked up, scaled up, and replicated in countries, embedded in national strategies. But I want also to mention that it's fascinating to read and to hear about successful JSDF projects, but there are some that may not show or have shown a visible outcome or a visible impact. And I was in particular involved in one of them several years ago in Haiti, where at the end of the project, I have to say, we could not really consider the project among the most successful, but it was tremendously instrumental for us in experimenting and in learning. And it was a project on how you can, it was an effort to try to support demand side of economic governance, which was a very nascent theme in that context in those years in Haiti, and where we really didn't know much. And it was said by another panelist, we needed to take the time with government, with civil society organization, and in the bank to think, to learn, to experiment, and to learn from mistakes. And so the impact was not evident immediately at the end of the project, but has been evident across the years where those efforts have then been redirected, adjusted, and fine-tuned. And so I would argue that the ability to scale up and replicate in other contexts is not just a result of the ability to show success in a pilot, innovative project, but is also the ability to learn, to document, to share lessons in those cases where these have not been necessarily as successful, and at least in the short term. And I think there is a challenge in doing that, and the challenge is to document very extensively out of every single project the lessons learned. And I think we do it very successfully in projects that can demonstrate success, and we probably have to do it even more in projects where we don't have that demonstrable results, but where we have learned tremendously, and we need to reflect those lessons in design of future interventions.
Thanks. Learning from failures, I think, a very good theme, even though, of course, we all prefer to learn from successes. Let me suggest we go around the panel, and I'm just asking you to tell us the one strategy you see in your project for scaling up and mainstreaming. What's the one single most important approach that you're taking in your projects to achieve scale beyond what the direct impact and the direct scope of the project is with JSDF funding? And I'm asking you to be brief because I do want to open up to the audience for your questions and comments on this theme. Mina, maybe starting with you, what's built into your project that can lead to scaling up and mainstreaming?
There are various strategies, but since you asked to just mention one strategy, I'll say unleashing potential of people. And having a strategy for that, you've got to have a strategy, otherwise it doesn't happen. You can't scale up from 6 villages to thousands of villages. It's extremely difficult. But if you have a strategy that in those 6 villages, we will make sure that at least 100 people from the communities are trained well, who can go then to next 100 villages. So what we did in all our programs, using both the JSDF grants, helped to create this community-to-community power, where they go as messengers. And I heard this from Nigeria part as well. This is extremely important. Making them go and disseminate the successes of what is happening on the ground. And that strategy, again, needs to be put in a very structured manner. So what Sri Lanka, JSDF, and Tamil Nadu has come up with is it has given structure to that community capacity. So at each district level, they have come up with these centers where they're taking people who have done very well in their villages, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is livelihood, or this procurement, governance aspects, where they know actually how to implement the programs. They know the rules, they know the guidelines, they know where to go for information. So these people are then taken to the higher level, where they're called community professionals. And they're setting up these centers and managing these centers themselves. It's on-call basis, on-demand basis, whether the program needs them, because all these programs have been scaled up now, if the government programs need them, or the NGOs are hiring them. So this is something which we think will be sustainable, will leave behind, and will help not only the program, but the country.
So giving space, giving visibility, connecting community leaders, and giving them the ability to inspire others is what I hear you say as a key strategy.
Right, that's right. But giving them a structure and system, that is very important. Otherwise, if they don't have a structure and system, after a few years, you won't see, they will all go in different directions. We also wanted to make sure that there are a lot of young, bright community members, that they are retained, that there is a path for them, because they need to see themselves doing, kind of rising up, not just being tied to the community development work. So they are given extra technical knowledge, extra trainings. Also, we're thinking of linking them to the technical institutions, professional schools, diplomas, degrees, so that they see a vision and path for themselves. They're not just tied and giving help to the other communities, but they see themselves growing in the same process.
Thanks, Mina. Valerio, you're leading a community-driven program in a different part of the world. Same strategy, different strategy? How do you aim to achieve scaling up and mainstreaming of the positive experiences in Moldova?
We are all working under World Bank projects, so practically procedures they are more or less the same. But I think that success of the pilot projects is the prerequisite to scaling up, because if you fail in the first place, then no one, of course, would support your ideas. A different procedure or just different method to make sure that projects are scaled up is to have clear and fair procedures that will be easily understood by everyone. And actually, these are the most important things that you can use in order to scale up. I can tell you more about, which way we scale up this second component, because we didn't really stay at the stage of just piloting the projects in those communities, but we improved them. And as a result, we didn't organize competitions only among communities, but among districts, which is a higher level. And we applied more structured procedures of implementation of projects, like development of social maps in order to identify the real needs and who the beneficiaries, the end beneficiaries are. So planning of social care services, organizing provision of services, and so forth and so forth. So there are many, many things that you can do in order to scale up and to show people that what you are suggesting is to their benefits.
Thank you. Anush, can the World Bank help scale up? How do we use our different tools?
Actually, we did, I believe, in Moldova. But I want to make a point that I think, at least in Moldova and what I do now in Tanzania, in my view, was an important lesson that I learned from the JSDF. I think the one way to scale up is to mainstream. And mainstream in a way that it's really large and influences the government-owned program and policy. And I think we succeeded in Moldova, and I wanted to go back to your earlier question and give you a concrete example of a project where this has happened. As I mentioned at the beginning, there were no other alternative services at the community level for caring for disabled or orphans. So there was a community parents group that actually wanted to establish a daycare center for children with disability who otherwise would be taken to a residential care institution. So it was like very small, enthusiastic group of parents of like 10 kids from 2 communities. And what they did together is to put the funding together. They had different sources and purchase a minivan and put together in the regular school where normally the children with disabilities would not be allowed. put a day center where they could bring the kids in the morning, have their daily activities, have some classes, learning activities, etc., and then in the evening they take their children back home. The parents volunteered whoever could. They had staff, trained staff, social worker, etc., etc. This model was quite successful in a way that other parents from around the communities started to bring their children with disabilities to this center. What happened then, these kids came basically back home and started to live in their house. What happens with the money that the state actually is putting for this institution? That money does not need to go to that institution anymore because these kids are no longer there. So there is a way to rethink how the care is financed. So this was a major policy decision that the government had to take actually to redirect the financing to follow the actual beneficiary of the financing. And I believe there is a new law now that actually allows the money to follow the client. This is a major policy change in a country like Moldova. And the reason this policy change could happen is because there was a very small experience and visible result that, you know, if you do have alternative care, these kids will not end up in the institution. And it's on the advantage of the government and the public to actually finance this type of care. In a follow-up phase of Moldova Social Investment Fund, the government wanted to take the piloting in a larger scale, as Valerie mentioned, to have to give districts and cities more power on how to manage the funding and how to manage the care provision and contracting of that care at the district level. So that's very, I think, important lesson to influence the policy change, which then it's not only you actually can scale up with the IDA funding, you can actually scale it up with the government-owned funding and leverage all the resources. I think that's an extremely important.
I think it's a very nice illustration of a different channel for scaling up, which is influencing policy making in a way that really allows bigger impact. So no, thanks a lot for that example. Maisha, I cut you off when you earlier talked about the project in Nigeria. Can you tell us what is your upscaling, mainstreaming, scaling up strategy?
I do want to say as well, just piggybacking on a couple of things that were said about mainstreaming and the demand side of this. If you look at the WISE project, and I said earlier that some of this is not really innovations. We know bringing it together into this project to demonstrate that things can be achieved is an innovation. There's no doubt about it. But we know that awareness and education are critically important to receptivity to behavior change communication around HIV/AIDS, reproductive health. We know that. We know that in order to take the information and change your behavior, you have to be socially and economically empowered. We know that. What we have to do is move from being a project into being programs and services that are ongoing and sustainable. And the ways to do that is for governments to be resourced and communities to be resourced and for citizens to demand services and ensure that those services are delivered in an accountable way. With the WISE project, and I think we came to this realization a little bit later in the project because we were so focused on implementation, is that what we're trying to do with our new interventions is to start the process of real ownership and management by existing government and community agencies a little bit earlier in the process. You get excited and you start doing things yourself because you want to get it going. And sometimes you don't get back around to that part of it. So we need to start that a lot earlier, demonstrating that you can do, you are doing, and you should be doing, and not creating more of a dependence on projects that are funded from the outside. The second thing, and I think is critically important, maybe because of my background around civil society and advocacy around social services, is this demand side and mainstreaming. The WISE project, because of its focus on demonstrating a model around which we can improve the lives of women and reduce their vulnerability, was able to work very closely with a couple of other donor-funded programs and the Ministry of Women Affairs to come up with a national policy on mainstreaming economic empowerment into HIV/AIDS, national HIV/AIDS programs. So there is a guidelines and documents that have been shared at that level, and now we're trying to get back around to motivating the different agencies to integrate the Department of the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labor, integrating these kinds of economic empowerment activities, improving the vocational training programs for women. Obviously, keeping girls in school is critical. Access to the kinds of health services that were provided through projects like the WISE project, that's critically important. So at that policy level, at the national level, at the state levels, at the local government levels, there have to be advocacy groups and oversight groups to implement, and that's one of the things we want to do. And as I said earlier, we're modeling with other development projects that are funded by USAID and hopefully through a couple of other private donors, how we can take this model and not simply implement it ourselves, but from the very beginning to be working very closely with the ministries of women, state ministries of women affairs and social developments, where they do a lot of vocational training, where they do a lot of HIV/AIDS awareness, where they do a lot of the social welfare and protection agencies, so that this is their program. So that's where we are at this point.
It's a very nice, clear story about how you want to mainstream into public policies, public program, public spending. Very clear. Thanks, Maisha. Lastly, on the program in India, the GEO program, Arun and Anandi, it may be obvious, maybe just making your partner's activities commercially viable. Is that the strategy for upscaling, or how are you thinking about upscaling and mainstreaming your project?
Well, at the very beginning, we did think of what would be our upscaling strategy and then tried to work backwards. So one of our key strategies is building leadership at the local level, design-led capacity building, which would have an eye to the crux of the whole project. That was one thing. And structure, picking up from what Meena said, structure. So what is the structure under which the local organization is configured, so that it doesn't split apart, so that it has an ability to absorb more people, and so on and so forth. So we focused on those two things, and we studied under state-specific laws what would be the most viable, the most efficient way of grouping people. And some of these groups in the Indian context has to involve caste, has to involve cultural backgrounds, has to involve a lot of these sort of aspects of social life which don't necessarily come into your sense of what should comprise development. So we did look at those things, and we, in our two sample states, we figured out these two things to start with. But I'll tell you, nothing succeeds better than success. So once things started moving, people got together and produced stuff which other people wanted, we were hugely encouraged with how many more villagers wanted to join this. Otherwise, there's a sense of education. I'll very quickly tell you the one failure that we've learned from some of the other endeavors that the foundation did. The premise was that let us provide more literacy at the village level, and then they will be able to absorb the training modules that we have prepared with such care. What happened with providing this default education at the village level was that there isn't much value for skills that people have automatically, almost automatically, inherited from their parents. Instead, they would much rather be a very lower order functionary in a government office and feel employed with the help of a school certificate that they might have gotten from the default education. So very often what had happened in our prior efforts, where we focused on two things. One was education at the village level so that they could bookkeep, account, etc., and provide orders for the market. These guys then became middlemen, trying to get poorer people to make substandard craft goods and then peddle them. And it became a bit of a business. They made a bit of money, blah, blah, blah. And then they accumulated stocks which nobody wanted, because the quality, the product didn't have intrinsic design value. This is where we changed our strategy this time. We have focused very sincerely towards design-led capacity building, like I mentioned before. And yes, what you said about getting in, showing this work to as many people as we can. So we are, in fact, investing in an intensive web-based process to develop a website which would be a knowledge management system with mobile phone connectivity. So that you have multiple points of access, and it's not just a transactional portal, but in fact, you as a knowledge seeker can get into that portal and find out about who's made what with what, and what did they do before, and the before and after story, and so on and so forth. I'll give you a quick example of this business of nothing succeeding better than success. We had 30 artisans we started working with in Bihar in a hand painting cluster, Madhubani wallpaper tiles. You will see we have them presented. The idea was innovative in the first place. They would typically make these traditionally on their mud walls. We started developing this format where we would have wallpaper tiles and you could configure them any which way you wanted. If you had a switchboard coming somewhere in your wall, you could leave that out because it's all modular and it'll join up wherever you like. This thing succeeded quite well. We received a huge order suddenly, and we were wondering, we have only 30 people there who are really skilled, who've been trained over a period of time. How are we going to manage? In a period of 1 month, the number of our Geo Madhubani cluster exploded from 30 to 230 within a month, and all out of personal enterprise. And when I talk about it, I get goose flesh, because none of us expected this. We didn't want to turn down this, this huge order that had come from one of the leading business families in India. It was a prestigious order. It was going to go places, etc. And we didn't want to give them hurriedly produced, shoddy stuff. So we were very nervous. And it was entirely on the basis of this enterprise at the local level. That
it's a great example to end this discussion on. I mean, you guys have been so interesting that we have run out of time. So I apologize to the audience and to those who may have wanted to ask questions, but I think you guys have provided very compelling stories of the two themes of the session. First, the innovation and the approaches to reaching communities and reaching people who cannot be reached easily otherwise through mainstream programs. I think very, very good stories and compelling examples of how you've achieved that. But then secondly, and as important, if not more importantly, I think you've shown very clear strategy for how to upscale mainstream, whether it's through influence on IDA or other development partner programs, through influencing policy change, through social mobilization, creating social space for mobilization to reach across communities, through influencing public expenditure programs and other larger programs, or through commercial success. I think it's a very, very nice story. So I really want to thank you for sharing your experience, and I think providing a very compelling picture of what JSDF has been able to do. And I really wish you all the very best of success. And thank you for the audience for staying with us. Thank you.